absolutely filthy. That's all thanks to you, kid. You made it possible. Jock, I said no cleaning.
I am ashamed.
Hey, I'm Matt, and I just got back from vacation. Vacation. That's not how you say that. So I was gone for about a week and set up these tanks around the same time, within a couple days of each other. And I thought it would be a good example of what could happen when you go on vacation, especially if you leave right after you set up a tank. I set up these tanks about a week and a half before I left, so definitely still during the nitrogen cycle period. And it's also during the, what I like to call the ugly phase of tanks. I think almost every planted tank goes through an ugly phase, especially low tech tanks, and even high tech tanks go through an ugly phase. And I think that's something a lot of other people don't talk about, is an ugly phase is normal. You are going to get algae almost 100% of the time, maybe like 9 out of 10 times you're going to get an algae bloom in the beginning, and that's absolutely normal. That's the nitrogen cycle happening, and that's also your plants adjusting to the water that you put them in. A lot of plants are grown outside the water, so they need time to acclimate to be fully submerged in the water as well. And then they also need time to start absorbing those nitrates correctly. If we use Aquasoil or something like that, it's going to be leaching nitrates, and it's supposed to do that because that's a nutrient for the plants to grow. So that's something to address, but at the same time, algae loves to utilize those nitrates as well, and it also likes to utilize the same kind of macronutrients that plants do as well. So algae blooms normal, completely normal. Something like this is kind of crazy. And the reason I have so much algae is because this is the Walstad tank, and we were doing a test of the Walstad method. So everything's set up just like the Walstad method. If you want to check that out, I have a video about that. But one of the things for that is a 12-hour light cycle. And usually you don't want to have that. Usually your light cycle should be about 6 to 8 hours. I think it's already kind of well established that that's usually the best time to have your lights on, 6 to 8 hours. The Walstad book says 12 hours. And if you have problems, reduce the type of light or change your lights out or any of that stuff. But for the sake of testing, I did 12 hours, and obviously that was way too much. So I think from now on, we're gonna be reverting that back to 6 to 8 hours. I think we've tested that 12-hour method of the Walstad method, and that just seems to be a little bit too much. The interesting thing about these two tanks is, like I said, I had set them up around the same time, but the Walstad tank actually, it looks like it has far less algae, and a lot of the stuff you see in this tank is actually just dead plant leaves instead of algae growing. So that's kind of super cool, right? This tank was also set up similar to the Walstad method, so soil layer, sand layer, but also had the root tabs there, which should have been capped off and unable to leach anything into the water with that sand cap. But I also had some kaolin clay left over on the rocks as a test. I used that just to test to see if I could grow moss on it. Didn't really work out. So I think that's why we have a lot of algae and a big algae bloom. I wasn't expecting to go on this trip, so I was going to be doing water changes like twice a day to get all of that kaolin clay out, but I wasn't around, so I didn't do those. So here we are. My awesome wife was taking care of these tanks while I was gone. She only fed this tank and didn't really do anything else to this. You can see I have a lid on this one. There's way less evaporation than this one. I have the corner risers for the lid, or the lid holder, I guess you would call them, but I don't have an actual lid on it. So way more evaporation. Luckily it didn't go too wild there. So with the Walstad tank, I'm just going to add a little bit more of a sand cap just because I had some worms creep their way out of the sand and bring some of the soil up through the sand. I'll clean up some of the dead leaves and debris and stuff. The Walstad method says you shouldn't do that, but kind of just looks gross, so I'm gonna do that. I'm not gonna vacuum the sand because you never do that for a planted tank. You want to never vacuum the substrate if you have a planted tank. That's pretty much it for the Walstad tank. So it should be pretty easy, pretty straightforward. For this tank, I'll be doing like a thorough clean out. Usually I like to dose hydrogen peroxide a little bit and just spot dose it, but I have some moss and it looks like a lot of algae is on the moss, so I'll have to figure that out. If you use hydrogen peroxide on moss, then it'll just die. So I'll probably be dosing glutaraldehyde for a little bit, and that's just liquid CO2. And all that does is just prevent the algae from growing. It doesn't do a great job of killing the algae directly, but it helps really inhibit the algae from growing. Thorough cleanup, manual removal of everything, vacuum it up, and we'll get working on it. So as you can see, there's just a ton of algae all over the tank. I just started out by using a toothbrush to scrub all the algae off of the glass, and then try to scrape all the algae off of the leaves and the moss. That way all the moss is just loose enough for me to suck up with the gravel vac. I also use a paper towel just to clean off the edges of the glass and make sure the glass is clear. And once all that was done, I just made sure to vacuum up all the loose algae and really made sure not to disturb the sand column too much. Once I got about half of the water out of the tank, I realized I didn't have a paper towel to stop what you're gonna see happen now. Usually you put a paper towel down to stop the water from pouring back out and disturbing the sand, but I couldn't reach it in time. Usually I just have it next to me, but just forgot. So the water ended up just spewing out of the siphon and disturbing the sand column. So I ended up having a ton of soil mixed on top of the sand now. So that just meant I had to vacuum more of the algae up and also all of the soil that came out of that sand layer. And this is something I've done before. Usually I have a paper towel just to block the entrance of the siphon so that it doesn't disturb the sand. You can also just tip the siphon up really fast so it doesn't do that, but it's best just to put a paper towel down so that you don't risk doing what I just did. And I just took a net to filter out some of the dirt from the sand layer. You can also do this with Aquasoil. Sometimes if you have a sand and Aquasoil layer, there's a bunch of Aquasoil pellets all over the sand. You can just take a fishing net, a fish catching net that'll keep all the soil or the Aquasoil in the net, and then the sand will just fall through the holes. And disturbing that soil layer definitely just added probably double the amount of work than I had before. I spent the next couple days for about a week and a half just vacuuming out all the little pieces of soil that were left on top of the sand, and then spot cleaning any algae I could find. Like I said before, I also dosed liquid CO2 every day, and then I also dosed AccuClear every day as well. The kaolin clay was really powder-like, and it just fogged up all the water, and the AccuClear just really helped bind up the kaolin clay and then made it easy enough to vacuum up. Luckily this tank's pretty small, so it's easy to do the water changes super fast. After about a week and a half of doing this, it's finally done, and I think the tank looks pretty good now. There's still a little bit of algae left on the moss, but I feel like once I put some shrimp in, they'll clean up the moss for me, and I won't have to manually spot clean it as much. If you haven't seen the video on how I escaped this tank, go check that out. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about handling an algae bloom. Like I said, it happens to a lot of planted tanks, so don't get discouraged if you do end up having an algae bloom in the first couple weeks. It just takes a little time for your tank to acclimate. And usually after a couple weeks of water changes, your tank ends up looking pretty good. If you found the video helpful, give it a like. If you want to see more videos, subscribe to the channel, that helps out a ton. If you know anybody having algae issues, help them out and share the video. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep scaping. Bye.